Jesus never once talked about abortion. Never once. For people perverting the gospel of Jesus Christ down to one issue, it's heresy.
No, Jesus did talk about abortion.
All right, let's see it.
You see, Jesus is God, the second person of the Trinity. As God, he's the author of all of Scripture.
So 2 concerns with this rhetoric. The first has to do with the fact that the notion of Jesus as the second person of the Trinity, as you're using it, did not exist until the early 4th century CE, when the Roman Emperor Constantine used his political power to compel the leaders of the church to achieve some kind of unity in their conceptualization of Jesus' relationship to God, and so invented the concept of consubstantiality in relation to Jesus' relationship to God. But that brings up the second thing. In the creeds, it says that you're not supposed to confound the persons, but you're basically arguing that the persons of the Trinity are fungible, and anything that God is said to have done anywhere in the Bible, you can just arbitrarily assert was Jesus' doing. So that violates the creeds, and that's not supported by anything in any syllable of the Bible anywhere, which does not recognize Jesus as God. But as a God, or as deity, or as divine, you're taking much later renegotiations of the text compelled by political power and trying to read it back into texts from centuries before that have absolutely no relationships to those philosophical frameworks.
As the author of all Scripture, we go back to Psalm 139, Jeremiah 1:5. God knew us in the womb. He knew us before He formed us in the womb. And to take the life of the womb-residing baby is murder. Jesus did talk about it in all of Scripture.
So I have 2 concerns with this rhetoric. The first is that there is not a single syllable of the Bible that in any way, shape, or form identifies the taking of the life of a fetus as murder. Psalm 139 certainly doesn't do it. Jeremiah 1:5 certainly doesn't do it. Neither does the beginning of the Gospel of Luke, which this creator did not cite. These passages observe that God is responsible for the creation of the human, but that does not automatically endow the fetus with full legal and moral personhood. Ostensibly, God is responsible for the creation of all life and all things. That does not endow all life and all things with full legal and moral personhood. Jeremiah 1:5 doesn't do it because this is just about God's foreknowledge. And ostensibly, God has foreknowledge of all people that have ever been born or will ever be born, and had that knowledge before creation, because God's supposed to know all things. Additionally, Jeremiah 1:5 is not prescriptive regarding all humans. It's actually describing an exceptional circumstance. Unlike everyone else, God knew about Jeremiah, and God ordained Jeremiah to be a prophet before his conception. Not at his conception, but before his conception. So again, this is entirely unrelated to the argument about human life beginning at conception, therefore it being murder from the moment of conception. And Luke 1 is also different because this is, again, not describing all humanity, but a specific, unique, exceptional circumstance where John the Baptist would be filled with the Spirit of God even in the womb, and it's the Spirit of God that caused John the Baptist to leap in the womb. So none of these passages in any way, shape, or form establish that the authors understood it to be murder to take the life of any given fetus. That's a question of when full legal and moral personhood is achieved. And throughout the Bible, that always has to do with the drawing of the first breath. And this is not just limited to Genesis 2:7, where we have the breath of life being breathed into Adam, making him a living soul. We also have the breath of life identified as the necessary and sufficient feature of human personhood in other places in the Bible. And this is why within Judaism, that has always marked the beginning of full legal and moral personhood. Now, it's a spectrum. And within the earliest discussions within early Jewish literature about this, the fetus is identified as water for the first 40 days. And then after that, it is a part of the mother's thigh. And then there are some traditions in which full legal and moral personhood is not even achieved until a month or two after birth, because those are particularly vulnerable periods, and personhood needs to wait until we're a little more sure that the person is going to survive. And so it's a spectrum. There were different perspectives on it. None of the perspectives within the Bible or within early Judaism identify full legal and moral personhood as being possessed upon conception. Now, there is one part of the Bible that makes clear that the fetus was absolutely not a full legal and moral person, and that is in Exodus 21, verses 22 and 23, where we get an assessment of penalties should two men who are fighting accidentally injure a pregnant woman. And there are two outcomes that are addressed. The first outcome is that this injury causes a miscarriage, and the penalty that is assessed is that the husband imposes a fine upon the guilty parties. This clearly conceptualizes the fetus as the husband's property, not as a full legal and moral person. The other outcome that is described is that the injury causes the death of the pregnant woman. And here it is life for life. It is the death penalty. Now, this is very clearly what these two outcomes were, because the covenant code in Exodus 21 is borrowing this law directly from the laws of Hammurabi. And if you want a discussion about the covenant code's use of the laws of Hammurabi, check out David Wright's excellent book, Inventing God's Law. Some people will argue that the two outcomes are different, that the first outcome is that the injury causes premature birth and no further injury to the infant, and the other outcome is that it causes a miscarriage. In addition to the fact that this would mean the covenant code is borrowing this law that is found in the laws of Hammurabi and in several other law codes, and every single time addresses miscarriage and the death of the mother, so it would be totally overturning what the law is saying. You only have penalties in the legislation of the Hebrew Bible if there is material loss. And there is no material loss with the cause of premature birth that does not harm the infant in any other way. So that is a misreading, clear and simple. Exodus 21, verses 22 and 23 assigns lesser value to a fetus than it does to a born human. Only the born human has full legal and moral personhood. Therefore, it is only murder if it is a born human. And we find this discussion as well clarified in the early Jewish literature. So this creator's rhetoric is not supported by any syllable of the Bible whatsoever. It is only intended to make people who already agree nod in agreement. And fundamentally, that's the purpose of apologetics, to convince people who already agree that they are right to agree.